Mm. Tell me more.
Well, if you think, I mean, I was just thinking Toy Story is a great story for Happy Butt.
Mm.
So he's got his passion, and to be able to fulfill his passion, there are goalposts along the way. And his capacity to dance between those goalposts and not get completely fixated on one or the other, to tell him whether his passion is a viable path or not. That's what gets him able to continue on the path, no matter what the stumbling blocks are.
And it's acknowledged and recognized along the way as people on that team or going to this event as an international travel. That is part of that attached identity, which really has nothing to do with the passion.
Mm. Mm.
Would it be nice? Yes. Would it be good? Like, would it make us feel good in the moment to say that we did that, we accomplished that, we were selected, we were noticed? There, I think that's the big one. We were noticed to be good enough.
Mm.
And so in that is just the whole identity, which really, isn't relied, isn't determined by the passion. And
And the passion isn't determined by it.
that's right. So we can forget that.
Yeah,
We can get distracted by that.
absolutely you can. And most of us do.
Yeah, I mean, most of us will want to do our best.
Mm.
And in our environment, be the best. And mostly we think we are doing it, fulfilling it. I mean, really, if you think about it, how can every company have the best employees?
Mm.
And how many of the leaders say their company has the best employees?
So it's also that movement that goes between, you could use those terms in psychology of internal and external locus of control. Are we the best in other people's eyes, or are we focused more on how we improve ourselves?
One holds momentum and one is unresolvable.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Proving to someone out there, right?
Mm.
There's always somebody else to prove.
Mm.
And all they're doing is trying to prove to someone else anyway. So they really don't care about you. You're proving anyway.
Mm.
Now, if we can leverage it together, right? Hook wagons, if you will, for a passion. Yeah, what we're focusing on our improvements together. Yeah, that's a whole different way than proving or being the
Yes.
best. And that's what I heard for Troy in the happy butt. It's like, oh, disappointed, right, of the current situation, the current outcome without, and then you think of it, there's no story in the background.
Yeah.
Like from the selection, from the choosers, right? You just here it is. Fine. Right? It's just it is. Would I do it that way? Yeah, probably, but could I do it differently? Always.
Mm. Mm.
I think that's the improvement.
Yes.
Fine line between a little bitter, right? So we can be bitter, but there's a better word for it. Resentful, there's the word.
Mm.
We can be resentful for others' decisions. It would have been nice, right, to have that identity, that label, to do that experience. And then without the story, we will try to make up like why we didn't get that.
Yeah, and there's a difference between looking at it to learn from it and picking it apart to determine whose fault it is or where to put the blame.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the resentment part, right?
Yeah.
So that's also all part of the wiggle.
Yeah. Noticing it, the awareness into it, to I
Mm-hmm.
to label, to notice, right, to pull apart is the wiggle. You bet. The wobble is the resentment.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, the first wobble is the decline.
Mm-hmm.
No, you can't go.
Yep.
And then you've got a choice in that wiggle.
Yep. And whichever choice, whichever door, like choose your own adventure, it's once you go down that path, right? You set the trajectory. You can always come back, like you can always recover, but there's a practice to recover that. It's like cascading doors, right? Once you open that door, we tend to cascade down. if it's going to be a negative or a positive door, right? The momentum will continue.
Mm. Because of where the focus is.
Mm-hmm. And we're just storing bits of information along the way, relating it to how we coped with one in the past. And do that enough time, it becomes a personality trait.
Oh, yeah. And then who are you without that?
Yep. So interesting how much trouble we cause ourselves.
I know. When it could all be so simple.
Well, when it's always in the difference, the answer is always in the difference. Something different. It's always there.
Mm. Mm. You know, it's interesting. I mean, what it came up for me earlier in the week as well. Um, so in astrology, you've got the 12 signs, and they divide them up into bunches of three in terms of whether the sign is, oh, I forget the first term. Shoot. But I'll go and look it up again. So the first, so for instance, if you start like my sun sign is Aries, and it happens to be the first house of, or the first sun sign, put it that way, sorry. So imagine it, you can imagine it in a wheel or a straight line, doesn't matter. But you repeat 4 times different positions of, the same time. So with Aries, they call every first one of the three, it's something like the initiator. I forget the term. But then the next one is mutable, and the third one is fixed. And then you go again, initiator, mutable, fixed. And that, I mean, when I found that out, I thought that is so interesting, because that's that's the that's kind of those are kind of the positions that we need to move alongside of and dance in between, because you need something to be fixed at some point. It's like that foothold, right?
Yes.
And you need something to initiate, and you need something to be mutable. It's got to be, things have to be able to be changeable, flexible. I found that really helpful to also to think about. Like, it's almost like, well, what phase am I in? What phase of creation am I in? Where am I with this?
So those are the 3 points inside of the 4 locations. Is that how I hear that?
It's just that it it gets repeated 4 times because they're 12.
Yep. Yep. That's, yeah. Initiation, mutable, which I'm say like an associated word is change.
Mm-hmm.
And fixed. And so that you're changing, and then that change becomes the fixed, like the normal for a while until it's initiated again. And
That's
the
right.
initiation is the changing, it's the experience, the amplification of it, right? And then we run with the application for as long as we need.
Yeah. And also the significance of it being repeated 4 times, right, has got to do with the seasons in the year. That's the whole thing. You know, the beginning of a season, the middle of a season, and the end of a season.
And instead of moving through them, we get stuck. We stick ourselves in the fixedness.
Yeah.
And rather than expanding into the initiation, we fearful or slowly or smallly initiate it, and we're resisting the change, the mutation of it. We're resisting rather than engaging with it. And then we looked at our fixedness just to prove that we were right.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, and the fixedness, you know, it's the same thing as, well, why change something if it's been working?
Yeah.
I mean, the interesting thing about that is that when you do that, you really are totally um deny is not the right word, but in some ways it is. You're denying the context, and context changes way more quickly than what we are willing to, than what we want to recognize, put it that way.
Yeah, well, we like to isolate it, right? And say, oh, all of that, like that doesn't change, but it's a whole system that's always changing.
Yeah.
But it's too much for us to sense that it's all changing. So that's chaos.
Yeah, that's right. I was listening to a talk with Steven Pinker and Sadhguru. And Steven Pinker is quite famous. I'm sure you know the name. He's a neuroscientist. It's really like top game. And it was very. I was really interested to notice how I experienced the two men And with the one for me, I haven't finished the interview yet, so I've got to give it I've got to stay open about this. But for one, with one there was an arrogance, and with the other there was power. And both of them were making observations about their own method of inquiry. But one of them was explaining what the inquiry led to, and also referred to the difference between when you take the inquiry internally in terms of your experience of things, but also with guidance, and pointing to the uniqueness of experience when you go internally. And the other was talking about the method of so-called objective inquiry. And then explaining why the fixed outcome of that inquiry negated the path of internal inquiry. It was really interesting to me to notice I mean, I've often, I've heard him being interviewed. I've heard Sadhguru being interviewed with a lot of Western scientists, and they're not all the same in terms of how they are with him in their interviews. Some go on a journey of exploration with him, and still they still bring their own bag of tools, and they explain it, but there's an ethic of exploration. And then with others there's this fixedness, and with that fixedness comes an arrogance. That's been my experience. So it pointed again for me, in terms of, well, which path do I want to follow for myself, but also which path I want to demonstrate. Seeing what you do want and what you don't want in observing other people. And it was interesting because, the work that Steven Pinker has done is astoundingly, it's contributed so much to the knowledge of the brain, which is very valuable, enormously valuable. but I wouldn't want to have that as my fixed path by any means.
A fixed arrogance.
Mm. I mean, I think the word arrogant does imply fixedness, right?
And it's like, what did you notice in the fixed arrogance? Like what had what clause, right, we're holding in that arrogance? Just from your perspective. And it's not like a truth, it's just your sense of it. My point is so that we can unravel, right, where this fixedness and where it can, like, fixed arrogance to me is a wounding.
Yes, in an individual it is.
Mhm.
And then you think about a culture. Because that's what I was really observing was, for me, the difference in terms of how you can use tenets from your culture. I mean, you can use them either way, but how some cultures lend themselves more to one than the other. I mean, it's a huge simplification to say this, and I say it under a lot of openness to correction. But for me, the Western scientific way of working with things is, if you follow it to the letter, is damaging. Potential for for blocking life force is very strong in that kind of culture, because it insists that the only things that are real in the world are things that we can sense through sight and sound mostly. And then it will, in the restricted sense of using Western inquiry, it will really not want to pay much attention to feeling and sensing. Whereas in Eastern culture, there's way more open space for an integration of the senses and then experiences that we have that we're not quite sure of how we how we have them. And I say that even under correction because I don't know enough about the language of inquiry in yoga, for instance, or in any of the depth meditations. And there are a number of depth meditation paths that have very clear, have a lot of clarity about in terms of the guidelines that they use and that they follow. So they have a method, and in that method, they're always curious and open to what people experience in practicing that method. Whereas for me, I think in Western science, the tendency, and again, I'm saying it's not always like that for every Western scientist at all, but the tendency has been that if you don't get a certain outcome, then you've not done the experiment in the right way. Morning, Craig.
Morning, Craig.
Good morning. I'm just going to listen, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going through some deep stuff right now, so.
All right. Welcome.
So when you say that arrogance is fixed, it's very interesting. Oh no, sorry, Jess, you said that what you hear with arrogance is that there's a very deep wounding, right? So when I think about cultures and I think about woundings, and then I think that there's a lot about history that I don't know enough of to be able to understand why did Western culture choose the path that it chose, and how come Eastern culture chose the path that it chose. I mean, there are so many variables, There are a lot of things that determine how a culture develops. And of course, to remember that because there are some dominant things in a culture doesn't mean to say that everybody in that culture operates in that way at all. That you can see a tendency in the social structures.
Yeah. And
yes, some of that development is very intentional and some of it is not.
Yeah, I think things are, I kind of think things are often a lot more random than what people actually realize. And when I say random, I think that they're beyond what we actually can conceptualize.
And we can and when we're open, we can listen to both points of view.
Yes.
If there's a difference, right, on the sides.
Yes.
Fixed, we don't.
That's right.
And that is a certain type of, that creates a certain type of culture, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if I think of it like intended, I say, well, there's intentions, and then there's always other ways that it goes, like other forces. As something comes in, other forces come into it. The best example I like to use is Facebook, like because it's a real, like it's one there. Like the intention was to keep, like, keep up with people, right? Stay connected with people, and it's changed. Yeah, and it's but with that intention, right? But then as we use it, and we can use it for something else.
Yeah.
As a group, as a masses, which is completely outside of the initiator's intention.
Yeah.
Now, that's a broad stroke, a very simple, because people have their own perspective of it. So I'm trying to paint it as neutral as possible. And as an outsider that has no idea what was going on, what Zuckerberg's original intentions were. Making money had to be part of it, right? Because he's still there wanting to make money. So he'll shift it to make the most amount of money.
Yeah.
Not that it matters, but was the original intention to connect people or make money? Only one can be a priority. Yeah, only one can be the top priority. And it may not have been either of those. I left it at 2, and there's endless possibilities. It is so much the perception, the perspective, which is the words, the stories, the names, the labels. That's one piece of it. And then the other piece is what those words, labels, definitions, attachments, what they feel, the emotions that they create, the emotions we assign to them. That's the other side of it. Like it's the stuff that's behind the words, right? It's between the lines, right? It's like we pick up on someone saying something from a position of arrogance, right? It's like, oh, we pick up on the arrogance. It's so subtle.
It's, yeah, listening is, in, how can I say it? In our listening, I feel it's so important to remain open to what you hear. And although you choose what you want to hear for yourself, it's important to recognize that there's value in everything that gets demonstrated, because for somebody else at that specific moment in time, something of value, something that's been spoken to is of value to them.
Yes. Yep. And who am I to discount that?
Yeah. Yeah. Because when when I listened to some of the other interviews, where they, like I said, there was this collaboration that took place between the two different methods of inquiry and the appreciation from each party to the others. There was so much that happened. And for me, those conversations hold enormous value. For somebody else who listened, to this particular one that I was referring to, there would be perhaps, more value for them in terms of being more assured of which path of inquiry into what life is. There would be perhaps more clarity for them at this point of which one they needed to follow. And they needed that kind of conversation to give them the distinction between the two. Whereas with the other one, they might end up being confused because each path of inquiry, it was demonstrated, has value. And that sometimes that can be a bit overwhelming for people, right? Just too much. And just to acknowledge that we all go through these different phases of development. And at times we need fixedness. And other times we need more malleability. And other times we need more igniting.
Like that, because it's always to just to identify which one of those stages are we in at all times? Like we're in one of them all the time. It's like just
Mm.
which
Mm.
one is the awareness? Because each of them have a different each of them are different, from the initiator to the mutation to the fixed.
Mm.
Not permanent, but fixed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important. Fixed for now,
Yep.
not
Usually it's like
forever.
when it's fixed, it's good enough, right? We will usually set that in place and run it for a while and put our focus on initiating something else.
Mm.
Then we're either on a yo-yo if it doesn't work out like how we wanted, right? We're on a yo-yo. Or it's a whole practice that's changed, right? And we stay like it modifies how we are.
Mm.
Again, just how narrow focus do we take it? Do we zoom in?
Mm. And then again, it's a position that you zooming in or out from, right? Where do you place yourself? Do you keep yourself on the edges of the zoom out and the zoom in, or do you put yourself in the middle?
Do we look at just one activity, or do we look at the whole thing of life? And it's like, oh, it's like all of them, you know, it's like
Yeah.
it includes all of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the space and time. I need to go for my day.
Good, Allison.
Have a great day, guys.
You too, Allison. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you for sharing your energy with me today, Jesse. I really needed it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
remember doing it.
Yeah,
I remember doing the grapefruit, cutting it in half and then scooping it down.
yeah,
It was shit.
yeah, yeah. Used to do that too. My grandmother used to do it this way though.